All right, welcome everybody. My name is 𝗬𝗂𝗧𝘂𝗧𝗧, and I'm a medical student working with the Wisconsin Voices for Recovery to bring you Saturday Night Chat. Saturday Night Chat is a monthly chat that creates a safe space for people to share their recovery journey and to show people in and seeking recovery that they're not alone and that recovery is possible. Today, we'll be hearing from Roger Bird. Welcome, Roger. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to
And
be here.
yes, and please, would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I grew up in Baltimore City and I've lived in Wisconsin for over 20 years. I worked in the bicycle industry for over 40 years. I was a professional mountain bike racer and I did a consulting business for a few years. And now I'm a certified peer specialist supporting people that are struggling with their substance abuse and poor mental health because I have that lived experience.
Mhm. Very good. Uh,
Yeah.
would you mind telling us about a little bit more about describing your life before recovery began and what that was like?
It was hard. Um, my mother became mentally ill when I was 4, and she was institutionalized, and my father struggled to raise me and my 3 sisters by himself. By the time I was 12, I started using drugs, and when I was 13, I began dealing drugs. And for me, drugs provided an escape and a comfort that I didn't have at home and I didn't have anywhere. By the time I was 16, me and school didn't get along. I dropped out of school, didn't finish high school, never went to college. And the drugs just got worse and worse. I ended up being an intravenous drug user and overdosed twice. And I was on my way out. It was obvious to me. So it was a conscious choice and kind of fate coming together all at once. Once I tried to start getting clean from drugs, it took me 5 years to actually do it, and a lot of attempts, a lot of failures, but I was able to finally do it, and I've been clean for a long time.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's really hard and the journey is really tough and it's no one can imagine how hard it is unless they're in those shoes. So, and I can't even imagine what you've gone through. So, I want to congratulate you for being here today.
Well, thank you. I'm here because I'm trying to help others and support others.
Yeah.
And by sharing my journey, by sharing my story, it helps me too to keep things in perspective because even, years and years after my drug use, there's all kinds of life challenges that come up. So I draw on my experiences and my lessons learned to make it through those challenges. And it is hard. It's very hard. It's hard every day.
Mhm.
But you know, I'm still here and I'm still going, and it has really been a journey. It really has.
You mentioned some challenges. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about some of the challenges you faced and how you overcame them?
Well, a couple of my big challenges were about 15 years after I was clean from drugs and I thought I was good, my marriage blew up and I began drinking. And alcohol was never a problem for me. And so I was an alcoholic for 5 years. And I was married a second time, and me and my wife at the time decided that we had to stop drinking. And between us, we had 3 kids at home, 3 little kids. And just the dynamic of trying to hold a job and being an alcoholic and being a father and trying to keep the household together, it was really beyond description. But I was able to, again, draw on my experiences from quitting drugs. And mostly, I was able to convince myself that the lies in my head were not helping me
Mhm.
and that anything was possible. And so that was one. And I've had a couple big bouts of depression. one of my nieces took her own life in 2017, and that continues to be hard every day for everybody. Um, and, career changes, relationship changes. Now I'm twice divorced. So it's the clarity that if I stop telling myself the lies that I'm not good enough, that I'm a failure, that, you know, I'm not going to amount to anything. And if I can believe in the possibilities that something else is different and I can find hope, then it's up to me. And I take that challenge and that path very seriously. And it's not easy. I mentor a lot of people right now that, are in the throes of their addiction, especially with the fentanyl and the meth and all the other stuff, xylazine, all the other stuff out there. It's such a mess right now. And between alcohol and meth, you know, they create kind of a psychosis. So when we're trying to think clearly about what our future is and what our possibilities are, we can't always see that with a fair lens,
Right.
not even a clear lens, but a fair lens of truth. So, yeah.
So how do you do that? How do you, if you're someone who's struggling with addiction, how do you get yourself to see beyond what you're seeing right now?
Well, I can't say how it's going to work for everybody or anybody because it's different. I can say for me, what I had to do is I had to find my community. I had to find the people that would support me and love me and keep me safe no matter what.
Mhm.
And when I was in active addiction, I was the worst. There were the people that helped me get out of my addiction, they cared more for my life than I did. And so that's a challenge. But I had to find my community. I had to get away from the bad influences. When I was able to shake the needle and get some distance between me and the drug needle, I moved away. I moved away from Baltimore for 2 years because I just
Mhm.
needed that space and I needed that time. And now one of the key things for me, with my mental health more than anything, I write a lot. I journal. I've written a couple books. And so writing for me allows me to speak my truth to myself and figure some things out and really dig deep. And I think for me, a lot of the pain that I was carrying inside that led to a lot of my addiction and poor behavior, it was clouded over. And when I really took the time to try to find my truth, things started to make better sense. And it's hard. It's hard. Not everybody wants to write. Not everybody wants to face their own feelings and come toe to toe with their monsters and their demons. But for me, that's what I had to do. I had to dig to the depths of myself and find where I was lying to myself and give myself a break. So there's a lot more to it, but
Yeah.
it's different for everybody. I mean, some people rely on meetings and therapy and rehab and a lot of other things, and those things work for a lot of people, but it really is an individual journey. So I think it all begins with finding safety and finding love. And from there, anything's possible. Because for many of us that are struggling with addiction or poor mental health, we don't feel safe. We don't feel that we have anybody in the world that we can rely on that understands us and listens.
Mhm.
And everybody wants to tell us what to do, and they're not us, and they don't know what's happening. And we resent that, or we kind of put up a defensive wall. So Sorry for the long answer, but hopefully that addresses it.
Yes, you mentioned finding your own community and your own people. Tell us a little bit more about, who were the specific people, events, or support systems that played a key role in your recovery and you relied on.
Yeah, for me, I really tried to do it on my own. And it was about a year or so that I just couldn't do it. I kept trying and I kept beating myself up. And I really made it worse because I was my own worst enemy. And every time that I relapsed or I ran back to the needle, I kind of beat myself up. So what I did, two very, very good friends of mine who I hadn't seen in a while because they were not heavy drug users like I was, I came clean with them. And we were sitting down in a house and I just came clean with them. I said, this is my life. My life is a mess. It's never going to be any different. It'll always be like this. And they stepped up and they chose to help me. And then my sister, my middle sister, joined the fight, and one of my friend's sisters as well. So four of them really babysat me and looked after me, and they'd meet me after work and make sure that I didn't slip out the back and hide and run away. um, and that was the start of it. And after that, it was just me being able to be honest with myself and honest with the world. And it took a while to be able to speak my truth about my addiction. And now I go to some meetings, NA meetings and AA meetings. I don't go every day, but it's kind of a regular thing. And that's a very welcome and supportive community for me. But I didn't use that initially because I didn't even know about it. I lived in a very, very small box and in a small world, and I didn't understand all the resources that were available.
Yeah. Um, so that's how you started your recovery. Looks like you had some great support from friends and family. How did you maintain it after getting over the initial hump of starting it? What did you do personally and mentally to kind of maintain that recovery and that mindset of not going back into that phase?
Yeah, well, the support of four of those friends that took me up to the point. I was still using a lot of drugs with them, but no needle. And so that was the biggest threat to me at the time, and that's what I was trying to change. And then I moved away. I left Baltimore, I moved to Colorado for 2 years, and I kept myself busy while still using drugs. And I started racing bicycles a little bit. And then when I moved back to Baltimore 2 years later, um, I spent almost a year just kind of feeling the waters and trying to figure out what I could do and really challenging myself on the deepest level. And then when I finally quit on April 4th, that fall, I turned pro on the mountain bike. So what I did is I found an activity that would engage me so much that as long as I stuck with that, it would give me enough adhesion. It would be sticky enough for me and keep me away that I wouldn't go back. So that was a little methodical, and I kind of thought that through, but it worked. And I raced mountain bikes for 17 years, and you know, my recovery period is very long, but I still count my days because I have to, because I recognize that in a moment of weakness, I could very
Mhm.
easily go back to it. But the big number, the recovery days number, helps keep me alive.
Does that serve as kind of motivation to keep going as well? The longer, farther away you get from that?
Yeah, it was about 10 years after I was past my addiction and I was clean for 10 years. And that number, 10 years clean, just provided so much strength and
Mhm.
so much self confidence. My cynicism in myself is very strong. It has been since 4 years old when my mom got sick. But
Mhm.
the yeah, the clean time it really is a motivator. It's a generator. It's kind of a dynamo that helps, just power me and keep me going. Even when some other tough challenges kick in, I recognize the fact that I've done it. I'm still doing it. Even amongst really tough stuff, I'm still maintaining my clean time. And that's not a lie. That's truth. And that's me being honest with myself. Look, I'm not so bad. I have
Right.
done some pretty cool things.
Hmm. Yeah, and I want to talk about that a little bit more about self-image and mental health and how that has changed for you since the time you were using drugs until now, since you're in recovery and being, not using drugs for more than 10 years. So, can you tell us a little bit more about how your perception of yourself kind of was in the beginning and now how has that changed throughout this time?
Yeah, I was a very negative judge of myself. You know, I'm a loser, I'm a low life, I'll never amount to anything. But again, they're lies. And once I was able to generate some proof that they were lies, it helped me along. But still, through the divorces, through the death of my niece, my kids are out of the house and, they've both graduated from college now. I live alone in the woods and, I don't have internet. I don't have cell service. I don't have a TV. And it's a challenge. And that's all self inflicted. But I have to try to find the motivation in myself to maintain that self confidence that I've been through so much tough stuff that, quite
Hmm.
honestly, I don't see anything harder coming in front of me. Of course, anything can happen, you know, God forbid one of my kids passes away before me. And I hope that's not the case. But I've given that thought because I have to deal with reality. I have to deal with the truth. And so the truth is, I've done a lot of amazing things. I help a lot of people, and I'm not everything that I thought I was. And yes, I was an addict for 13 years. Yes, I was an alcoholic. Yes, I'm a high school dropout. All of those things are true, but I'm a lot of other things too. And I have an opportunity to learn and grow and proceed in life in ways that are truly unimaginable to me if I give myself a break. So that's how my mental health has changed. And I've had a couple really nasty rounds of depression. And at the same time, it's digging to the bottom of the well to find my truth, which has kept me here and will keep me here. You know, I'm, I'm speaking in some language that is could be, you know, offensive or scary or triggering for some people. But at the same time, it's my truth. And that keeps me strong and that keeps me going. And that at the end of the day is what I need in my future to make sure I don't go back.
Right. That's awesome. That's a great mindset, and I think a lot of people would benefit from just realizing to think that way. Um,
Well, easy to say, hard to do.
right, right,
And not everybody can get up and move out of state, and not everybody can be honest with their friends and have their friends show up for them, and not everybody has transportation, and not everybody has resources, and not everybody has a safe environment at home.
right.
And whether they're 12 or 14 or 37, it's still hard for everybody. So I'm not trying to minimize what I just said. I'm just trying to add a little dose of reality. Like I got a couple guys that I'm mentoring right now, and they're in a horrible way. I
Hmm.
got one guy who's off in Chicago, and I, one guy in Arizona. I don't day to day, I don't know if they're going to survive 24 hours at a time. So that's tough. That's tough. But I feel that. I've tasted that. I've lived that before.
Yeah. Can you go into a little bit more about what you're doing now and how you're helping people now?
Yeah. So last year, I had an event in Madison, and it was about addiction. So it was a public meeting, and I formed a panel of four people, and we talked about addiction, and we talked about fentanyl, and we talked about suicide, and a lot of really tough subjects. And there were a bunch of people there, and some of the people there were those that controlled the peer support program. And so I got invited to join this training system where I could go through the peer support training program. And then I took my test and got certified. So, what that allows me to do is to have the skills and to have the resources to be able to support people that are struggling with all of this tough stuff. So I've had a couple little jobs here and there, but mostly along the peer support lines, but mostly I do private mentoring. And I have a podcast on trauma, and I've written two books. One of them is a memoir, one of them is my journey through addiction. And I have a website, and I just try to share my story, and I try to be hyper visible and transparent, and maybe it'll help somebody somewhere. And I do a lot of poetry, and some of it's dark and some of it's sunny, but it's life, it's honest, it's true. So I stay pretty busy, and
Mhm.
I'm just happy that I've had a career. I worked for a bicycle company, Trek Bicycles, for over 20 years. And I'm lucky that I had a career that allowed me to have a little bit of a retirement account so that I can have some flexibility and help people now without always having to get paid for it, because that's not what it's about. I mean, what's a life worth? It's it's priceless. So I take phone calls at 2 a.m. I drive to Arizona to try to find somebody and help them and turn around if I don't find them. And I do what I can. And I think some of that comes back to me, certainly with people doing nice things for me. But, when I'm able to help a parent or help their child, and then if my children need help one day, I just think that pay it forward mentality, it's karma, right? It kind of pays off. It comes around. And I think if you lead with love and lead with the intention of trying to help,
Yeah,
a lot of great things can happen. And I've seen that firsthand. So
that's great. That's awesome. Thank you for doing this, Roger.
yeah, thank you for doing this. Thanks for spreading the word, because I'm just one guy. You're getting it out to many, many people that really need to hear it. So thank
Thank you.
you.
One thing I did want to touch on was also stigma a little bit and how that has affected you. So would you mind telling us a little bit more about, have you experienced stigma from how about using drugs, and how has that affected you at all?
I used to really get bound up with that. And believe it or not, the first big round of stigma that I had to deal with was being a high school dropout.
Mm.
So when I was a senior manager at Trek and traveled around the world, blah, 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 whatever. But I was many times in these meetings, and I'd find myself in a lot of different situations, social settings, whatever, around people. And they're like, "Oh, where'd you go to college?" And I'm like, "Well, I didn't go to college." And they're like, "Oh, that's cool. Where'd you go to high school?" And, the conversation just falls apart from there. But when I had, kind of that big boy job. I didn't exactly come clean with my bosses and some of the people I worked with about my drug use because quite frankly it wasn't relevant to them. But people that I worked with that I found who were struggling, I did share my story, and it made a difference because I was able to say, well, look at me. You think that I got here easily? I didn't. It's been tough. And the proof is in the pudding, like anything's possible. Anything's possible. And so after kind of that big corporate job ended, I really came clean on my sobriety and my recovery time. And I started a website and a podcast, and now I'm an open book. I mean, there's like I think one skeleton in my closet that I haven't said just because nobody's asked me yet. But it's stigma's tough, but I think with the fentanyl outbreak and the opioid crisis and a lot of the other stuff that's hitting every community everywhere, and just about everybody knows somebody that struggles with their mental health or some sort of substance abuse. And certainly there's plenty of people who abuse alcohol. I think that stigma isn't what it used to be. You know, as an intravenous drug user, in my time, there were never clean needles available. The only way to buy needles was to have a diabetic card and go to a pharmacy. And I didn't have one of those.
Mm.
So, you know, maybe it's too much information, but we shared needles. And I don't know how I didn't end up with HIV or Hep C, but I shared needles for years because that's all there was. And so now, you know, with clean needles available, and there's all kinds of resources as far as harm reduction and keeping people safe who are still using. Um, you know, I think some of that stigma has changed, but still it's very hard. But one of the keys to my recovery was, like I said many times in the last few minutes, is my truth. And my truth is I was an intravenous drug addict. Therefore, I am an intravenous drug addict. I'm not a practicing intravenous drug addict, but that's part of me. And I don't hide it. And I'm proud of it. And quite honestly, my addiction gives me strength. I think it really can be a strength for many, many people. And it seems like a lot of us who have been through this, one path that we can choose is helping others. And that helps keep us on the straight and narrow. But it also allows that lived experience to join the conversation. And so, someone who's going through real problems with substance abuse, if they're talking to clinicians and academics, and you know, no offense, but the people who have learned this in a book, yeah, great, there's a lot there, there's a lot of opportunity there. But then there's also the lived experience
Right.
that really means something. And so I have been able to turn that stigma into a strength, and it's truly a strength. And you know, I just live wide open. I live truthfully, and this is me, right? Take it or leave it. And that's been critical to my success.
Is there something you would want healthcare providers to know, or people in general to know about stigma and addiction recovery that you think people don't know?
I think it's a bigger issue. I think it's a much, much bigger issue. There's a concept that I've come up with, and I call it the trifecta of ugly. And that means that when I judge, blame, or assume, I feel ugly, emotionally ugly, because I don't know anyone's path.
Mhm.
I don't know their story. I don't know where they came from. And I can see their behavior, but I try not to judge them as a person. Everybody has a story. And quite frankly, my story isn't that bad. I know so many people that, they start telling me what has happened and I'll be crying. But I think it's a bigger issue of we shouldn't judge and we should try to meet people where they are and accept them as they are. And if their behavior is getting out of control, then yeah, we need to set some boundaries. But I think without that lived experience, like you said at the very beginning, you just don't know. You can't know. But I think trying to have someone on the recovery team that has that lived experience, I think that's key. Certainly you need to find the right person, but to have someone who's been there, I think it just rounds out the opportunity to create a process and a system and some sustainability for someone who's trying to recover.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're towards the end of our little session here today. I would like to give you some time to just relay any message you'd like about your recovery, or if anyone, if you were to give any advice to anyone who's recovering themselves. Is there anything else you want to convey at all?
Well, I'll start with this, and I might be repeating myself a little bit, but for anybody who's having trouble, please try to be kind to yourself, at least for a minute, and try to find the strength and the power to believe that something else is possible. Change is always going to happen. Your life will not be like this forever. Something will change. Maybe good, maybe bad. Something will change. And it is possible to get closer to where you want to go and leave the tough stuff behind. Whether it's a abusive relationship or a food addiction, whatever. It's tough, but it's possible. And there's so many people out here who care. There's so many people who will take your call, who will show up, who will drive across town and give you a hug. And maybe we can't give you a bunch of money, but we can give you a hug and we can listen. And sometimes I have found that's more valuable than anything because many of us don't get that. And so I just want to say that I hope that you can find your way. And there's a lot of resources out there. There's 988, which is the suicide crisis hotline, and there's local resources, and there's so many people that want to try to help if you'll reach out, if you'll pick up the phone, if you'll dial it up, look us up. So I think it's just a message of hope that we care.
Hmm. Well, Roger, thank you so much for coming here today. We appreciate you, and your story is inspiring for sure. And thank you for all your comments and your experiences today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much.